I'd been invisible for years. That day, I became the target. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 36 years old. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. For the last 9 years, I'd worked at Meridian Ventures, tucked in the back corner of the finance floor. The guy who double-checked the numbers and quietly fixed everyone else's math before things went public. I wasn't flashy. I didn't climb social ladders. I just made sure the money flowed the way it was supposed to. That Thursday morning started like all the others. I was the first one in the office, sipping burnt coffee from the kitchen and reviewing a variance report from the renewable energy division. Everyone else trickled in, groggy and yawning, still rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Then, the conference room door slammed open so hard the glass rattled. Rick Blackwell, our director of special projects and my direct boss, barreled in like a man with fire under his shoes. He was red-faced, nostrils flaring, his tie askew, and his eyes locked on me like heat-seeking missiles. I looked up from my monitor, confused, then stood instinctively. "You?" he snapped, jabbing his finger toward me. "It's always the quiet ones." For a second, I thought he was joking. I half smiled and opened my mouth to ask what was going on, but the room had already gone still. Dead still. 12 heads turned toward me. 12 pairs of eyes narrowed, searching for something I couldn't explain. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "You tell me," Rick said, stepping closer. "You've been here, 8, 9 years? You've had your hands in every special project since the Johnson acquisition, and now we've got a $2-3 million discrepancy? That math doesn't lie, Nathan." I felt the heat crawl up my neck. "That's the first I've heard of a discrepancy." Rick tossed a printed spreadsheet across the table. "Looks familiar?" I barely glanced at it before I recognized the formatting. It was mine, my style, my labels. But I hadn't generated that file. I looked up at him. "Where did this come from?" "Doesn't matter," he said flatly. "You're the only one who's been touching those line items. If someone's been cooking the books, it's you." That's when it hit me. He wasn't looking for answers. He already had them, or at least the version he planned to sell to everyone else. This wasn't a question. It was a public execution. From the edge of the room, Devin from marketing leaned forward slightly, his mouth opening like he wanted to speak, but thought better of it. Dominic, the project manager, just stared at the floor. "I'm not going to play dumb, Nathan," Rick said, pacing. "You've always kept your head down, too quiet, too clean, but we both know quiet doesn't mean innocent." Every word coming out of his mouth was meant for the audience. He wanted them nodding. He wanted them suspicious. And judging by the way Lucia clutched her coffee tighter and avoided my eyes, it was working. I could have shouted. I could have pulled up 3 years' worth of files and audits and buried him in proof. But I didn't. Not yet. Because Rick wasn't wrong about one thing. I was quiet. But he'd forgotten something. Quiet doesn't mean stupid. And I had receipts. Rick stalked across the room, the veins in his neck bulging like they were about to burst. He grabbed the remote off the table, pointed it at the screen on the wall, and pulled up a slide that hit like a punch to the gut. Bold red numbers, circled in bright yellow. $2,347,682. 12. "Someone in here's been siphoning funds," he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous tone people use when they want to sound calm but are anything but. Little by little, project by project, over the last 8 months. 8 months. I did the math without even thinking. That was exactly how long I'd been assigned to special projects, handpicked by Rick himself. Guess when the discrepancies started showing up? Rick continued, tapping the screen like he was unveiling some great mystery. Right after Nathan joined the team. I stood frozen, watching heads slowly turn toward me. Devin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dominic leaned forward, his hands clasped like he was trying to stay neutral. Lucia wouldn't even look at me. "That doesn't mean anything," I said quietly. "Correlation isn't causation." Rick smirked like he'd been waiting for that. "No? Then why are all the authorization codes tied to your login? Why are the flagged transfers traced to your credentials?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I hadn't authorized anything irregular. I never even touched wire transfers. That was Dominic's job. I just did the reports. But I could already see the doubt crawling across the room like smoke in a theater. Rick wasn't just accusing me. He was painting a story. And the worst part? It was working. "Dominic," I said, turning toward him, "you know I don't have clearance to move funds. You do. Dominic nodded slowly, then glanced at Rick. I've already checked his computer, he said carefully. The files, they're all there. The access logs, the authorizations, everything matches. My stomach dropped. He wasn't backing me up. He was confirming it. They'd set me up. I looked around the room. Devon stared at his notepad like it held the answers. Lucia looked suddenly very interested in her coffee. Even Jenna from operations, someone I'd helped fix a dozen budget forecasts for, had that stiff, don't get involved look on her face. This wasn't an investigation. This was a purge. And Rick had already chosen the scapegoat, me. I stood there, heartbeat pounding, trying to keep my face calm. They thought I'd fold. They thought the quiet guy would sit there and take it. But they didn't know what I knew. I'd been watching, recording, saving. 8 months ago, Rick moved me to this team, and it wasn't because he liked my spreadsheets. It was because he thought I'd be easy to pin this on. He was wrong, because I had the receipts. My hands were clammy but steady. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and thumbed it awake. My heart thudded in my ears as I scrolled through the folder labeled RB Score Insurance, just a meaningless name to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. Rick, I said, my voice louder now, calmer, like I was the one calling the meeting. You might want to take a look at this. I walked slowly to the head of the table and held out the phone. He hesitated for a second, like he wasn't sure if it was a trap. Then, with a smug smirk, he took it. I watched his face change as he started swiping. First confusion, then annoyance, and finally, something close to panic. He tried to keep his cool, but his fingers moved faster, like he was trying to swipe away the evidence. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. "You tell me," I said. "That's a video of you giving verbal authorization for the Fortis transfer on March 2nd. There's another one from April 12th. And that one at the bottom?" I leaned in slightly. "That's the full screen recording of your desktop from when you logged into my profile remotely and used it to queue up 3 wire transfers." The room went dead quiet. Lucia gasped. Jenna blinked like she was watching a soap opera. Dominic took a slow step back. "You," Rick's voice cracked. He shoved the phone back at me like it was infected. "You recorded me?" "Ohio's a one-party consent state," I said, pocketing the phone. "So yes, I did. And before you ask, there are backups in 3 locations, including one set to email everything to legal and HR if I don't disable it by 5 o'clock. Rick's face went white. "You think this changes anything?" "I think it changes everything," I said, leveling my eyes at him, "because now everyone in this room knows that I'm not the one stealing. You are." Devon sat back in his chair, stunned. Lucia clutched her phone like she was ready to start recording too. Dominic rubbed a hand across his mouth, clearly rethinking every choice he'd made that morning. Rick tried to recover. "This isn't proof. This is manipulation. You edited this. Then let's get the IT team to verify it," I offered. "Or better yet, let's pull the server logs, see who really accessed the transaction system." Rick turned toward the monitor, pretending to be busy, pretending to still be in control. But the damage was done. "You don't get it," I said quietly. "I knew you'd try something like this. That's why I started documenting everything. The transfers, the approvals, the midnight edits on files you thought no one would notice." He didn't say anything. I stepped back toward my chair, the adrenaline slowly giving way to exhaustion. "You thought I was too scared to fight back," I said. "You thought I'd be your perfect little fall guy." I looked around the room at the stunned faces. You thought wrong. And in that moment, Rick wasn't the one holding the power anymore. I was. Nobody moved. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Rick stood frozen at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes darting like he was searching for an escape hatch. For a man used to being the loudest voice in the room, he suddenly looked very small. Then his phone buzzed. He jumped. It was face down on the table, but the screen lit up anyway. The brief glow caught Lucia's eye. She leaned in, squinting just enough to read the name. Whatever she saw made her eyebrows shoot up. Rick picked up the phone slowly, looked at the screen, and then something shifted in his expression. A flicker of panic, a crack in the carefully polished mask. "Meeting's over," he said, voice tight. "Everyone out, now." But Dominic didn't move, neither did Lucia, or Devon, or Jenna. No one stood. "We're staying," Dominic said, arms crossed. "Whatever's happening, we deserve to see it." Rick's nostrils flared. "You're making a mistake, Dom." "No, Dominic said quietly. You did, when you set him up. Rick turned to me then, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. You think you've won something? I met his gaze. I'm not here to win. I'm here to survive. He stepped toward me, lowering his voice. You'll regret this. All of it. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. He sneered, trying to summon the authority he'd always leaned on like a crutch. You think this little stunt makes you a hero? I shook my head. I'm not a hero. I'm the guy you didn't see coming. His phone buzzed again. Then again. He glanced down, and this time I saw it. The tremble in his hand. Not much, just enough. I stepped forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You should know, I called them before I came in. Rick's head snapped up. Who? The authorities. I didn't blink. FBI, Financial Crimes Division. They've been reviewing the files for a week. You're bluffing. I'm not, I said, and you should know they love it when the evidence is neatly organized and time-stamped. You're welcome. The third buzz came. Rick stared down at his phone, face slack, and I saw it land, not just the reality, but the inevitability. He was done. He knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. Lucia exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Devin looked stunned. Dominic just nodded once, like the final piece of the puzzle had snapped into place. Rick didn't say another word. He just stood there, eyes vacant, jaw clenched, as the sound of distant footsteps echoed from the hallway. Security, maybe, or someone from legal finally catching up to the mess. For years, Rick had ruled this team like a king behind a curtain. But the curtain was gone now, and the quiet one had finally spoken. FBI agents walked in like they'd done it 100 times. Calm, unbothered, dressed in business casual that somehow still made everyone in the room sit straighter. One of them, a woman with a leather folder tucked under her arm, approached me. Nathan Cole? I nodded. She held out her hand. Agent Sandoval, we'd like to review your documentation. Is now a good time? Rick stood behind her, motionless, as if he could will himself invisible. No one spoke. No one helped him. The only sound was the scrape of a chair as I sat back down and unlocked my phone. I handed it to her. Everything's in that folder. You'll find videos, screen recordings, and transfer logs. The backups are already stored remotely. She nodded, professional and unfazed, and turned to the man beside her. Get IT to mirror this. We'll need the server data too. The second agent moved briskly toward the hall. And Rick? He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't even try to talk his way out of it. He just stood there, shoulders hunched, the color draining from his face inch by inch. Mr. Blackwell, Sandoval said without looking at him, we'll need to speak with you privately. He didn't respond. One of the agents motioned toward the hallway. Rick walked like a man headed toward his own funeral. Stiff, mechanical, defeated. No cuffs. Not yet. But the humiliation was worse because he wasn't being dragged out of here in disgrace. He was being watched. By everyone. And none of them looked surprised. After they left, the room stayed quiet. No one knew what to say. Dominic sat down hard in his chair like someone had pulled the air out of his lungs. Devin just rubbed his face, exhaling slowly. Lucia walked over to me, gently touched my shoulder. You okay? She asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. She gave me a small smile. We're with you, just so you know. And then she left. I sat there a moment longer, alone now, the adrenaline finally leaking out of me. My hands shook as I grabbed my coffee cup, cold by now, stale and burnt. Only then did it hit me. A few hours ago, I'd been the accused, the fall guy, the one everyone was ready to throw under the bus without blinking. Now, I was the whistleblower, and they all knew it. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Board wants to meet. You'll be hearing from Diane Mercer. I stared at the screen, heart skipping. Rick was gone, but the storm he created wasn't. I looked around the half-empty room, still buzzing with aftershocks. The company was a mess. My team was under suspicion. Everyone had questions, and now they all pointed at me, not as the culprit, but as the one who brought it all to light. I had a decision to make. Walk away now, or stay and rebuild what they'd tried to burn down. I wasn't sure yet, but for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible anymore. The boardroom was nothing like the one we used downstairs. This one had windows that touched the ceiling and a view of the skyline so pristine it looked like a painting. Everything in here screamed money and power. The long oak table, the leather chairs, the silence. I sat across from Diane Mercer, interim COO, flanked by two other board members I only knew by reputation, McAllister from Compliance and Yvonne DuPont from Legal. They all looked like they'd stepped out of a quarterly earnings report, polished, polite, and about as emotionally expressive as a spreadsheet. Diane folded her hands and leaned slightly forward. "Nathan, thank you for coming in so quickly." "I didn't think I had a choice," I said. Calm, but firm. A flicker of something, amusement maybe, passed over her face. "Fair enough." They'd reviewed the files, the reports, the footage. They knew Rick had been behind the embezzlement scheme. They'd also confirmed the timestamps and metadata from my recordings. It wasn't just airtight. It was gift-wrapped. "We've opened a full internal audit," Diane said, "and the authorities will proceed with criminal charges. But there's something else we need to discuss." I waited. The others stayed silent, like statues waiting for activation. She looked me in the eye. "This company has taken a reputational hit. The press will get wind of this soon, and when they do, we need someone credible to stand in front of it. Someone clean. Someone who already proved they were paying attention." I didn't say anything. "We'd like you to lead the new compliance division," she continued. "We're building it from the ground up, and you'd report directly to the board." My mouth went dry. "You want me to fix the thing Rick nearly destroyed?" "We want you to make sure this doesn't happen again," she said, folding her arms. "You've already demonstrated you're capable, and more importantly, you've got the trust of the team." I sat back in my chair, letting the offer hang in the air. They weren't doing this out of kindness. They needed someone to clean up the mess and restore public confidence. And who better than the guy who refused to stay quiet? "You get points for audacity," I said finally, "but I'm not saying yes without conditions." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I want public exoneration," I said, "not buried in a footnote or slipped into an email. I want a full company statement. Deste, I was cleared I was right, and the people who backed me weren't complicit." "Done," she said without hesitation. "I want hiring authority, full control over my team. Reasonable? No NDA." That made her pause. "I'm not signing anything that muzzles me," I added. "I kept my mouth shut for 8 months watching this company eat itself alive. I won't do it again." She nodded slowly. "We'll draft terms that protect both sides." I looked down at the contract they'd slid across the table. One line at the top caught my eye: Director of Corporate Compliance, Office 14C, Rick's old office. I glanced back up. "If I'm in, all the way." "Are you in?" Diane asked, voice level. I picked up the pen. "I'm in." My hand barely shook as I signed the line. It was the first time in weeks I'd said anything without second-guessing myself. They thought they were buying my loyalty. What they got was my integrity and the promise that I'd never let this happen again. My first act as director was simple: rebuild the team from scratch. No politics, no recycled yes men, no one who had played dumb while Rick carved his kingdom in the shadows. I wanted people who had backbone, the kind of quiet competence that never gets attention until everything falls apart. I started with Lucia. She showed up the next morning before I even had my badge recoded. I caught her by the elevators, coffee in hand, eyes cautious. "I guess you're the boss now," she said, half smiling. I nodded. "You in?" She didn't ask for a title. She didn't even flinch. She just said, "Where do we start?" I made her my second. Next came Amara from Public Relations, the only one who'd had the guts to question Rick's last big budget request. She was sharp, direct, and had a spine made of steel under all that PR gloss. Terrence from Security was a no-brainer. He'd pulled me aside during the investigation, told me, off the record, that something about the access logs felt wrong. I remembered that. That kind of quiet loyalty mattered. I gave him control over internal data reviews. Then came Dominic. He waited 2 days before showing up at my office. He didn't bring excuses, didn't try to rewrite history. He just stood there and said, "I was scared and I was wrong." I stared at him for a long moment, then gestured toward the chair. "You'll be on probation," I said. He nodded. "Fair. Mess this up again, and it's over." "I won't." So I gave him another shot. Devin didn't show up. Not to the meeting, not to the team email, not even to his desk. HR told me later that he'd submitted a resignation via email the day after Rick was escorted out. No goodbye, no explanation, just a signature at the bottom and a final, polite, "Thank you." Honestly, I didn't blame him. Every day was a battle. The numbers Rick left behind were a mess: tangled audits, fake vendors, shell approvals, People were scared, not just of getting fired, but of getting exposed. The old culture, protect the top, ignore the rot, had run deep. And now we were asking people to do the opposite, to shine a light. Late nights turned into early mornings. Our inboxes flooded, our Slack never stopped. There were weeks I barely saw my apartment, but I didn't care, because for the first time my name was on the door. People nodded when I passed them in the hallway. They listened when I spoke in meetings. My team looked at me like they knew I'd fight for them, because I would. We weren't just fixing numbers. We were fixing a company that had forgotten what integrity looked like. And slowly, day by day, it started to feel like ours. 6 months later, Rick pled guilty. It wasn't a splashy trial, no cameras in the hallway, no headlines that lasted more than a day. But the courtroom was packed when it finally happened. I was seated in the front row behind the prosecution, flanked by 2 of our internal auditors and a rep from the SEC. Rick walked in wearing a charcoal suit 2 sizes too big, his face thinner, his confidence hollowed out. No tie. Just a flicker of the old smugness clinging to his posture, like he still believed he could talk his way out of this. He looked straight ahead. Never at me. I wasn't surprised. The prosecutor called me to the stand halfway through the morning. I took the oath, sat down, adjusted the mic, and then I told the story. Not the headline version, but the real one. The day he slammed that conference room door open and pointed a finger. The fake files, the fabricated logins, the silent room where no one spoke up. The weeks I spent building a digital paper trail he never saw coming. I didn't add drama. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. When I finished, Rick finally looked at me, just once, like he was trying to figure out when exactly I stopped being a nobody and became the person who destroyed him. I met his eyes. He blinked first. The judge didn't draw it out. 8 years in federal prison, 2 for parole eligibility, restitution ordered, asset seizure pending. Rick didn't flinch when the sentence came down. He just nodded like a man who already knew he was never getting back up. Outside, the reporters barely noticed me, and that was fine. I didn't need a spotlight. I walked past them like they weren't even there, stepped into the clear gray morning air, and just breathed. It was over. When I got back to the office, they'd set up a small celebration in the break room. Nothing fancy. Just a few streamers, a Costco cake, and a bottle of sparkling cider on the counter. Lucia handed me a plastic cup. "To the quiet ones," she said, raising hers. The team echoed it. "To the quiet ones." I smiled and drank. It wasn't the perfect ending. There were still investigations, still systems to fix, still people whispering in corners about who knew what and when. The culture we were trying to change didn't crumble overnight, but something had shifted. We were no longer the people who looked away. We were the ones who stood up. That night, when I finally got home, there was a small envelope waiting in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Just one line typed on the card inside. "Congratulations, you won." No signature, no threat, just those words. It didn't take a genius to guess who sent it. Maybe it was Rick, maybe one of his friends, maybe just someone who thought they were being clever. But I didn't care, because they were right. I had won. Not just the trial, but the right to walk into work every day with my head high. The right to build something better. The right to speak up and be heard. For years, I kept my mouth shut and my head down. That version of me, he's gone. The quiet one finally spoke, and everything changed.